There we go. All right, good morning once again, everyone. Continuation from Thursday, which is now we've completed up until Unit 2.3. So addressing those activities, I think we are on Activity 2.1 and Activity 2.2. Have you attempted it? Were there any issues that you experienced? Like I said, anything that you need help with and anywhere that you're stuck, then we do discuss it in class and way forward and what needs to be done. So, yeah, you can just drop me an email.
To be honest, I haven't because I haven't been on the road, like you said.
Yes.
But I will. This is my weekend task. I'll work on it this weekend.
No, perfect. And you have the remainder of today to work on all the activities. So,
That's what I'm going to do. Yeah.
yeah, so it won't be a wasted day, even though it's not going to be a full lecture. I expect you to still, like we mentioned last week, it's a lot of self-study that you have to do in terms of these assignments and activities, and obviously everything is going to be assessed. All right, so if you can see the screen that I'm sharing, we're on 2.4, and to follow in the notes, we are on page 28. Yes. So let's continue. So in Unit 2.4, so we've been through the novice researcher, which is your postgraduate honors students. And at a novice level, they're just learning how to do research. They're learning about academic literacies, reading, writing, comprehending, understanding, communicating, speaking. Um, then we moved on to the middle, positioning the master's level students, okay, who have now progressed from the honors into the masters with a little more experience as they go along through the levels, right? So today what we're looking at is becoming the knowledge producer, which is the PhD student level, right? And the PhD research identities that goes with it. So looking at what is in your content, we're on page 28. We've come across this author before, Badenhorst, and Badenhorst suggests that candidates are likely to undertake prolonged periods of study in a highly specialized area required of a PhD candidate for one or more of three reasons. So, having a specialized area. So, in your honors, sometimes you're given topics, research areas that you need to conduct research on, right? Masters as well, sometimes you'll be given focal areas. So at this point in time, you're not an expert, but you're building yourself up and you trying to gain a bit more knowledge on how to write academically, how to write your research, how to formulate your problem statements, your background, your objectives, your conceptual framework. So everything is still building up until you reach your doctoral level. And it's a long journey, right? It's a prolonged period that we take because when you come to this stage, you are considered to be a knowledge producer in that you created a specialized field or specialized area in what we call, when we apply for NRF rating, a niche area, your focal area, right? So a bit more established and experienced as a researcher or writer. So the first thing that we're looking at is a PhD is tied to an academic identity. As a scholar, a doctor who appropriately credentials himself is deemed safe to pursue research unsupervised. This license to call yourself a doctor carries credibility in a broader society. So, when we spoke about the first unit 1.1, having an academic identity, and I asked you if you had to write a story or profile yourself, what would you put in your biography? Because your identity is telling a story about yourself, who you are as an academic. because we're looking at academic identity. So how do you identify yourself? And when people are reading or people go on to the various social media platforms, whether it's a professional platform like LinkedIn or ResearchGate, or it's a personal platform, your individual platform, which is your Facebook, Instagram, and so on, how do you portray yourself or profile yourself to people? So when people go Google you, and I even asked you, do this as a task. That first lecture we had, I said, go and Google yourselves and see what comes up. How many of you actually did it? What did you find out about yourselves? Because remember, this is what people are seeing about you. This is your identity on the internet or anywhere, any platform. Anyone? Did anyone Google themselves?
Yeah, I
Tony?
did. I Google myself, Prof, and the first thing that shows up, fortunately, is my LinkedIn and then
Yes.
my university profile, which I'm very happy about because those are my professional identities.
Yes.
Um, I would have been a bit shocked if my social media showed up first or anything related to like my Facebook, but it seems as if the kind of connections that people make from with me initially are professional connections.
Yes, it is. Okay. Um, but why would you be disappointed? Here's the question. Why would you be disappointed if your Facebook came up first or your Instagram came up first or
I I just feel like it's less formal, and if I were to present myself to students, I want them to get the best out of me from the offset. So not to say that like social media is not the best, but it won't provide them with anything academically viable or something suitable for, an academic audience.
yes. And this is what we spoke about the academic identity in that it's what people see first, because before they even meet you, like I said, when you are applying for jobs and stuff like that, we profile you first. We look at what's out there, what you have out there, your academic identity, before we actually meet you in that interview, you know. And that already tells a story of this person. For example, Tony, it will tell a story about this is who Tony is. And I think as academics, a lot of our profiles always comes up. I think the university profile, then your research profile, LinkedIn, ResearchGate, academia. So I think because we publish so much and people are reading more of those, go more onto those sites, I think that's why it also shows up more because we're more active. The more active you are on certain platforms, that's what tends to show up first, right? Someone that's a bit more active and more social on Facebook, their profile will show up first, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But like you said, us as academics, we want people to see more of the professional side. But then again, you have to ask yourself, why do we want to let people see only the professional side? Because we also spoke about our identities um, being multifaceted in that we have different characters. You're a different character when you're at work, you're a different character when you're in your personal setting, you're a different character around certain family and friends, so but it doesn't mean that it's false. It just means that we adapt to the environment that we are working in. And that is what creates the various different identities that we have. Now, coming to this PhD level, I've noticed that from the time, okay, I got my PhD in 2015, 2016, right? Um, the moment that title changes, and it says there, right, the license to call yourself a doctor carries a lot more credibility in a broader society. The moment you have a title of doctor, or you have a title of a professor, or you have a title of a director, it adds more credibility. People take you a bit more seriously. And I've experienced that and funny enough, it's a funny story at UJ. A colleague of mine was phoning to get something done, but we were phoning someone at HR. No, it wasn't HR, finance business partner, right? So we were traveling and we needed, obviously, our travel documents, everything to be in order, um, you know, everything to be processed so that we can have the visas done. And because if you work at UJ, you know that some of these processes are very delayed. So my colleague was phoning around, phoning the finance business partner for UJ and trying to get stuff done. And for the first time, I had just graduated. And for the first time, it's like, and I don't hold a lot of like emphasis on titles, like you have to call me doctor, you have to call me prof, you know. I'm not like that. But funny, first time I used this phrase where it's like, I am doctor, you know, I introduced myself as doctor. And do you know how fast? Because it holds weight, it holds credibility. You know how fast we got things done as opposed to my colleague who did not have the title. And I don't think that we should have to. Yes, you know, it's a huge achievement, a huge honor to be a doctor and have achieved a doctor status. And you know, you at that PhD level, but to throw around titles just so that you can get something done. But unfortunately, people do take you a lot more seriously when you hold some kind of title. And I'm sure you would have experienced that as well with maybe yourself or with others around you. Okay, so that is why it does hold a lot more credibility. People take you a lot more seriously. And if they see it on social media and you have that title, trust me, they're going to be reading the stuff that's out there or whatever you post and whatever you put out there. They want to know, what is this doctor saying? All right. Secondly, the purpose of completing the PhD is to develop an expertise in a specific field. And this is where you form your focal or your niche area because you now become that subject expert. You are an expert in that particular field of study. So when people search for you, people speak about you, and they would, okay, yes, this person is an expert in their field. They've read about your publications, your scholarly identity, everything is out there, and it portrays you as this expert because your work speaks for itself. Candidates are required to read widely, to conduct original research, and to add to the existing knowledge that is out there, the existing body of knowledge that is out there. So obviously at a PhD level, you're more experienced. You can write being less supervised because you are an expert in that particular field. Those areas of expertise may become teaching areas in the academic context, so that when you are maybe looking for a job and you want to get into the academic space, then that niche area now becomes your teaching and learning expertise area. For example, as I mentioned on Thursday, my niche area was total quality management, right? Master's in quality, PhD in quality as well. So you can see my field of expertise. Okay, so people will look at you as an expert in that particular area because, for one, I have the qualification to base my expertise on. I also teach in that area and I publish in that area. So when people are looking for example, a moderator or an examiner or the like, you know, in that specific area of total quality management or quality management or even quality engineering, because PhD is in quality engineering, you know, they will source me, they will look for me. And I've had people that have, you know, and I've even been headhunted twice, but I never took the jobs. But yeah, because of your expertise in that field of discipline, you know, you have a niche area. So, and also when you are applying for NRF rating, right, not just the funding, the rating, to be rated as a researcher, you have to have that focal area. Sometimes they say multidisciplinary, and then we look at different facets, but I've got that. I've got the multidisciplinary, but you still have your focal area, main area for me, which is quality. So you've got the knowledge to back it up, you've got the experience to back it up, and you've got the qualification to back up to say that I'm an expert in this particular field. Thirdly, the PhD often involves a life interest or passion. Signing up for a degree provides the space and time to think deeply, to reflect analytically, to explore intensely, and to evaluate systematically an intellectual obsession. How many of us right here have that passion to be in academia, wanted to be in academia, have the passion to further their studies and say, yes, I will become a PhD student and I will become a professor? How many of us have that passion as an academic? This is where you want to be. This is what you want to do. Anyone?
As old as I am, I have that passion. I really absolutely
Always
love
wanted
what
to
I
be an
do.
academic.
No, I thought I was too stupid, far too stupid.
No.
I was just a teacher for many, many, many years. And at the age of 40, I woke up. And then once I'd done my master's, I first up to honors my master's, then I realized, you know what, you're not that stupid. And then this world that was opened by my supervisors, I just knew I had to do this. Especially the research side, I love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'll tell you a story now, which is, and you'll be a bit shocked for me to be sitting where I am and where I came from. Anyone else wants to weigh in before I tell you my
Yeah,
story,
prof. I've
my
also
journey?
always, well, it's not something that I've always wanted, but I think like Eureka, it's a similar thing where experiencing postgraduate studies through a certain supervisor, because I had an initial supervisor, and when I got my second supervisor, it almost everything just unpacked in front of me. I saw a new world, and I wanted it. I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to enjoy the benefits of being a part of it, but also the rewards that it comes with, because people work very hard to get these positions.
Yeah. Now with me, it's different. Okay. So yes, yes, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Prof. Like what my colleague mentioned, I also find myself in that position. While I was doing my master's, let me just do my master's and get a job and do that. So after completing my master's, my prof asked me, Victoria, do you want to become an academia? I said, what is the meaning? And I explained, I said, oh, let me see how the journey was. So I don't know that the journey will be so demanding. So when I enter into it, I was even blaming myself. Why do you do this? Why? So my first and second year, I just start feeling the interest, but I see that it's very demanding. And then I was okay, let me just finish up and see. So now I can see that I find myself in that position. So I have to follow the procedure and get what I want. I know it has a lot of respect and integrity and also demanding, but I'm looking forward for me to get there. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for your insights. So basically what I was getting at, so a lot of you now, from what the take back I have is at your master's level, because you were influenced by something that you experienced at your master's level, it took you into academia, right? Even though I was at my master's level and I was lecturing at the time, it still was not, I don't know, I can't say passion. I loved lecturing, right? I hated the studying and the research part of it. Put me there with so I come from a statistics background, right? So even when I started teaching, it was teaching statistics, right? Or quantitative techniques. Even before like when I finished matric, I come from a family of academics, mind you. From my dad being executive dean, also being a lecturer, professor. My sister, he's a DUT. I originally started off at UNISA, then I ended up at DUT and now at UJ. My sister's at CPUT, she also an academic. I eventually ended up becoming an academic. Uncles at UNISA, some at DUT, one sitting as a deputy vice chancellor at UCT. So a lot of big shoes to fill, right? With having these family or these academics in the family. It was not the direction I wanted to go in. My sister knew, yes, she's going to go into academics, but she's on the IT space, lecturing there, also running the World program. My dad is also quality and operations management like myself. Like I said, I started off stats and then went to his department doing quality techniques. I wanted to be an artist. I went, even after matric, went for the aptitude exams. That they had an entry exam at that time, and then you go for an interview, and so you don't just go through that selection process, and you get accepted, the APS score and stuff like that. We had to go through the aptitude test. You had to draw, you had to have an art portfolio, and at that time in school I did art, and it was called technical drawing. So I got accepted, but obviously Indian community, it's not a career. So I was told that is not how you're going to make a career, by drawing. So I was like, okay, fine. So I'll change it. I'm like, choose something for me, because I am hell-bent on becoming an artist and I want to study art. Then eventually I started off with marketing management, right? And then from the marketing management, then I progressed on to, at that time, what is called the BTech. It's now the advanced diploma. Went into operations management with a statistical background, and then doing a second BTech in quality. So this is where my mindset changed at that BTech level. Not to become an academic. I'm still finding myself, because you can see I'm changing, different fields, different areas and stuff like that. Still not wanting to be an academic, because much like you said, Yurik, I didn't find myself being an academic or intelligent. And, at that level, I felt you got to be like really, really highly educated and have so many degrees to get into academia. I didn't want that. I didn't want to study, Um, and I mean, yes, came to my master's, then you're trying to find a niche area and stuff like that, then got into quality. And like you guys mentioned, it was someone that triggered. And yes, there was a mentor that triggered me. I had a female supervisor, and I was her first master's student, right? She was also just about coming up at that time, got her PhD and was supervising, and I was the first student. And, there was a lot of things that she lacked. And we used to butt heads like you wouldn't believe. We were always arguing. We wouldn't see eye to eye. But she got me through. I finished the master's in about 1.5 years. She got me through that master's. And it was still, even after that master's, is this really what I want to do? Do I still want to continue as an academic? And I was not permanent or anything. I was temping. I couldn't find a permanent job. At that time, it was very difficult in KZN to find jobs, right? I had to apply outside of KZN in order to get a job. And then that is where I decided. CPUT, UJ, I applied, had the interviews almost at the same time in that week. Lucky enough, got the one at UJ, got permanent, because for me now, it wasn't that passion. I needed a job. I needed something stable. And then it developed into a passion. But can I tell you, up until today, even though I'm a professor, I have a niche area. I don't like doing research. The worst part of my research, of doing research, is literature. I can't do literature, so not I can't. It's like I want to pull my hair out when I have to sit and do a literature survey. So what I'm trying to say is, not everybody has that passion, but eventually it develops into a passion, like you guys said. And I'm glad you said that. You've had that influence. You've had somebody that was a supervisor. I had the experience where I had a supervisor and I saw something that was lacking, and I wanted to fill that gap, where I'm not going to be that supervisor that you are. Because you do along the way get supervisors that are good, supervisors that are lacking. I'm not going to say bad, because skills can be improved. and this is where we say expertise. So also the person that's guiding, and you as a supervisor doing this module now need to learn as well that there's ways in which to improve on how you supervise for your students, so that firstly you can be better at supervising, and then they can be better guided as students so that they produce better work. So this is where that passion comes out. uh, so like I said, you guys have that passion. I had to still grow into that passion, still growing into it. But I love my teaching. This the research part is a bit of a, I will write, I can write. I've produced, like I said, wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't do all these things, but the passion for research is not really there. All right. Now we go on to activity 2.3, which is respond to these questions in your learning journal, which is the activity that's loaded on Moodle. About a page or so. Are there other reasons why students whose research you are supervising have embarked on a doctoral study? Are Badenhorst reasons or any others added by you likely to influence the way you supervise? Why or why not? Let's unpack the first one, right? A few minutes on that. Are there other reasons why students whose research you are supervising have embarked on the doctoral study? So for those of you that are currently supervising, or even if you are planning on supervising, or maybe you co-supervising at this moment, right? Have you come across, whether it's a doctoral, not just only the doctoral student, but any student for that matter, but let's say preferably if you have a doctoral student that you're supervising or co-supervising, what are the reasons why the student chose the research or chose to study? Because a lot of industries will tell you that having a PhD, you overqualified. It's not really a requirement to have a PhD when you are, for example, my field, quality and operations management. If you're in a manufacturing setting, we need someone with practical knowledge. Yes, we have research, R&D departments and so on, but more somebody has practical knowledge that can work on a production line, not somebody that's going to come in with a PhD. They don't need somebody that's so highly qualified. Some of the reasons, anyone, why your students come in? Eureka?
Well, I think in education, it's a little bit different.
Mm,
You don't find many doctorate students at a young age.
yes,
Because in education, it's really, as you also say, about experience.
yes,
So if a person comes to me and says, no, he's just done his BEd and now he's doing his honors and he's going to complete his masters next year, and then now wonder, because a lot of it you can only gain through actually practically teaching. So I think it's a little bit different, but people are chasing money in some instances where that's the only way you can really stand out is if you've got a higher qualification,
yes,
especially in the school situation. And especially in some contexts where things are very patriarchal still, for a woman to get anywhere in education, the higher your qualification, the better. So they want to do a doctorate for promotion, not for academic, to go into the academia.
yes, yes. And as we spoke, as Badenhorst has mentioned, one of the reasons was that the credibility behind it. And also with being Women's Month, and like I said, I've been to enough events and stuff for this month. And you'd be amazed the fact that you're bringing up women and having a PhD and stuff like that. It's difficult, especially when they say, balancing home life, especially balancing as a mother, having to do a PhD. Um, it's difficult. I would know what it's like to balance. A lot of us will know what it's like to balance, have those challenges, and then need to have obviously proper support structures. Having that PhD holds some weight in that, like I said, it's not only the credibility, but you're taken a bit more seriously, you know. Um, Aside from the PhDs being a bit more of experienced and mature adults, um, a little of the older generation and not the younger generation. But if you look on LinkedIn, I'm heavily active on LinkedIn, right? And you would notice that the PhDs these days are getting younger and younger. I think there was the youngest PhD, African female, um, at the age of, was it 23, 24, with a PhD in, I think, one of the sciences or something. I read the article, it was sometime last year, and like I said, it's a long journey. People don't stop studying. They continue. They don't even take that year to breathe. It's like as soon as you finish your honors, straight into masters. As soon as you finish your masters, straight into either a second masters or a PhD, you know? And that's where I found myself as well because I never took a break. If I can count the number of years that I've been studying, including the fact that I'm doing that second PhD right now and finishing my write-up, 17 years in total. No break in between. I didn't take a study break. I took sick leave in between doing my first PhD. Um, but that was the only break I took from studies because I was in hospital and well, I needed to be hospitalized. But it's like I said, that title holds so much of weight. Um, Even in industry, whether it's academia or industry, it holds a lot of weight. And for a female, you are taken a lot more seriously when we look at. So people do it firstly, if they're going into academia or already into academia like ourselves and want to progress further in our careers and climb that ladder. The other reason would be that being credible, being taken seriously, having that title. Um, Other reasons would be self-fulfillment. You know that you have achieved something by reaching the highest level of an academic career, which is getting a PhD. You cannot study any further than a PhD. You can supplement and add on, but the highest qualification that you would get is a PhD, and the highest title that you would get is a full professor. Yes, Yurika?
I think there's also an element of addiction. Um, I,
Off?
of being addicted to studying. I couldn't stop. I also went on it. This is my third PG dip. Um, it's just, I mean, I was supposed to go on pension in a week's time, but the university have asked me to stay on.
Yeah.
But I've just got this thing. I just need to know more. I'm so scared that I'm going to get behind.
Yes.
So I don't know. It's like a combination of maybe that's the way I see myself coming from not a very good background, and I think that is sort of a way that I can sort of show that I'm also worth it. I don't know. I'm
Also,
just
with coming from a background and struggling, even if it's a disadvantaged background or whatever the circumstances is, when you're given an opportunity, right, to further your studies and stuff, you're going to grab the bull by the horns because if it's going to help you progress, I mean, look at where you are today. You're a professor. We've taken those opportunities and we made full use of the opportunities that were given to us. And this is what we experience. And that's where I think the passion also comes in that we we don't want to stop studying because we're going to continue to educate ourselves. And people were telling me, no, you know what, you're absolutely crazy because you've at an associate professor level. Why are you even doing the second PhD? But for me, it became more of the niche area because I went into industrial engineering, but I needed more of the quality at a PhD level, right? And UJ wasn't offering it at that time, and I didn't want to study it anywhere else because I wanted to incorporate it into engineering. And I actually developed this qualification that I'm doing right now, um, and I ended up studying it. But yeah, it comes with a lot of reasons as to why students or yourself want to progress and do further studies into masters and PhDs. The second one is with Badenhorst reasons, are there any others added by you likely to influence the way you supervise? Why or why not? So looking at those 3 reasons that are there, you're going to write about a page responding to these 2 questions. The reasons that we just discussed, and also, do you supplement Badenhorst reasons with other reasons that you think would help your students? Why and why not? Okay, and that is activity 2.3. Any questions up until this point? I'm not seeing any hands up or anything. Okay, thumbs up, so we can move on. Thank you very much. We're still on unit 2.4, becoming the knowledge producer. And this is where we're going to look at the vignettes that we had. In Thursday, we read about 2 and we dissected it. We're going to do the same thing, looking at your doctoral research identities. So vignette 3 illustrates, we're on page 20, still on page 28 at the bottom. What was already evident in the master's student stories, tensions and contradictions between professional and scholarly identities. Looking at undertaking doctoral research in academic writing, reading, visual representation, all of this in a long-term project in which the stakes are much higher than a master's level. And we can all agree that the levels at which you are writing your research, stakes are much higher. There's a lot more risks involved because people expect you to be an expert in your field. The second vignette presents a short extract for a narrative in which professional and scholarly identities are intertwined, while the conversation in the final vignette raises questions about identities in South African university and consequences of such identity construction for your postgraduate students and their identity. So let's look at the first one, dissected much like we've done with vignette 1 and vignette 2. The central question investigated in Kemp's doctoral research was whether, and if so, how, a postgraduate student group's ways of working together contributed to enabled identities as a student and as a teacher for each member of the group. So they're working as a group, and did their identities enable and influence each other? At the time of the research, each student in the group to which Kemp herself belonged was also a teacher of English in a secondary school, a language school, or university teacher education program. Kemp discusses several challenges experienced by the study group members, with perhaps the most important being the tension between their established professional and their emerging scholarly identities, in which academic literacies are implicated. They have the extra stress of making themselves vulnerable as teachers by taking on student identities, finding oneself positioned as a student and therefore with limited knowledge in a new field, having to follow rather than lead, and having to be assessed rather than assess others may leave one feeling very exposed when one is accustomed to the safety of being on the other side of the desk, which is quite interesting because you right now are finding yourselves on the other side of the desk because you are the student. You are no longer the academic in this class, right? You are the student, you're on the receiving end of this program, all right? And how do you feel? Can you relate to what Kemp is saying in that they're in this group and being on the receiving end is very different from when you are standing in front of those students and you are supervising or lecturing anyone? And then I'm going to give you an example as well of one of my experiences.
Oh, I'm extremely, I can totally relate to that.
Yes.
Especially when we first started off with one of our PG dips at Rhodes, there are students there who take over and they come up with the most amazing theories and things. And I used to sit here and think, what the hell are they talking about? And feel an absolute idiot. So I never took part. It's only now lately that I've sort of woken up a bit, but I always feel inferior. And the more I've studied, the more I've realized how little I know. Yet there are people who are not even at the same level yet, but they actually think they know everything.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult thing because knowledge is so wide, and knowledge, there are different knowledges, not necessarily superior knowledges. So
Yeah.
it's a tricky one, but I can relate to that one. You feel vulnerable.
You do. And I'm going to give you one of my experiences just now. And that also touching on what you said, Eureka, is that you sit in this group or you sit with these other students, especially now when you're embarking on these post grad diplomas or whatever you want to study, you take the role of the student. And remember, you've got, even in our younger days, you've had people in your class that were knowledgeable, had experience, some that just thought that they knew everything. Then you sit there exposed, vulnerable, because sometimes you don't know the stuff. Even right now, if you're sitting in this class, I'm an academic. I'm sitting in this class, I'm on the receiving end, someone is lecturing me, and I still feel exposed because I don't know all these terms, all these concepts. And it's like the one thing that hit us 2 lectures ago was the translanguaging. And I mentioned that it's the first time that I've even experienced a word like that, you know. Um, but we learn from each other. That's the main thing, is that it's knowledge sharing and you're learning from everyone in that group. But obviously the dynamics and the environment is different because you, like I said, are on that receiving end because you now assume the position of a student. Anyone else wants to weigh in? Okay, so here's the example I wanted to give you. Much like what Eureka said, you sit there and you're vulnerable, right? So we embarked, and this was last year. So last year we did an assessor training where you become certified as an assessor, right? Because it doesn't mean that you're an academic. And the reason why I got my department to do this is because just because we're an academic, it doesn't necessarily mean you know how to assess. But we went for training to improve our skills, get certified as assessors so that we can also assess externally, right? Not only just internally. Then at the beginning of the year, we did the follow-up, which was the moderator training and the moderator certification. So we certified now as assessors and moderators. Gave us a bit more of an advantage in that everyone says that it's easy to teach, but can you assess and can you moderate, right? And we thought we knew. Okay, I'm an academic, I know how to assess, I know how to moderate. Do you know, sitting in that class, assuming the position of a student, thinking that you know everything, assumed that you knew everything, and it wasn't just me, it was my other colleagues from the department as well. You got humbled, you got schooled, because what we thought we were doing was the right thing in doing assessments and moderating and stuff like that. And what we were actually supposed to be doing was completely chalk and cheese. And we learned from it, and it humbles you because it also teaches you, as much as you think you know the knowledge, you know everything, we do not. And life is always about learning, experiencing, improving every day. And I always say it's a learning experience for me because I really, really learn something new every day. And it amazes me. And that is why, like Eureka says, you don't stop learning. Continue doing those degrees, continue even doing a short course that's 3 months or 6 months, but you're improving your skills, you're improving your knowledge, you're improving yourself. Self-development, it's skills development you, as an individual. And we felt torn when that, she was very nice, the trainer that came in this training academy. um and they accredited by the CETAs, obviously, to conduct training for us. But I must say, you think you've been in academia for what, 15 years? Well, I've been in academia for about 20 years now. And no, we definitely got humbled in that you don't know everything. And we sat, like I said, assuming the role of a student, and you learned a lot. So this is where I think this Vignet also comes out, in that you sit there exposed because you're so used to that safety, being on the other side of the desk, and we are the academics. But when you are the one that's the learner or the student, it's a completely different dynamic. All right. So we take on the role of a student identity. Your scholarly identity changes because you're no longer teaching. You are now assuming the position of a student. So you now have a student identity. Anyone wants to read Vignet 4 for me while I drink some water? Victoria, would you like to read? We are now on page
I
29. Oh, Tony, if you
I
don't
can
mind.
read it perfect fine.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The Vignet 4, right? Okay, scholarly identity formation is central to Reed's description of her doctoral studies as an endurance race rather than a Grand Prix. Reed and Dixon, Jenks, Reed, and Walden. The first part of her story is reproduced below because of the situation of being positioned initially as sufficiently knowledgeable to teach in a university but not to participate in its research activities is not uncommon in South African universities, where significant numbers of staff were, and in some disciplines, continue to be appointed on a temporary basis or even in a permanent capacity without a PhD. With a permanent appointment came apprenticeship into research and eventually the decision to register for a PhD with complex consequences for her professional and scholarly identity. When I was employed as a short-term contract lecturer in an applied English language studies, research was not part of the brief. I was positioned as a temporary teacher, invisible in the academic community, without access to research leave, funding, etc. After a permanent appointment, extensive research, mentoring, and publications, which included the co-editing of 2 books, I set off on the practice laps for a doctoral research project. The distance education literature advises using feedback from students as a guide to the redesign of teaching materials. To continue with the motor racing metaphors, when I attempted to work with former students to redesign some of the materials they had used, I crashed out of the race. They responded to materials as satisfied customers rather than as critics for reasons that I should have anticipated, and I went back to driving school. I joined the AELS research class, taking up a new position as a student in a class which included honors and MA students whose research I was supervising. On this journey, each research weekend pit stop from proposal presentation to presentation of aspects of the data analysis was an occasion for a fuel injection, while individual sessions with my supervisor combined fuel injection with repairs.
Thank you so much for that. Anyone wants to unpack that, or do you want to comment, Tony, on what you just read?
I just think it's important for us to understand that some things aren't pre-equipped when we get these positions as lecturers, as teachers, and it's fundamental for us to look at our own shortcomings, especially if you're a good teacher, perhaps, and you're not a great researcher, or if you're a great researcher and
Yeah.
you're not a great teacher. You look at these gaps in your own development
Yes.
and look at how to then commit yourself into improving, whether joining a PG diploma like we are doing, or something that would guide you into developing in that profession.
Most definitely. And it come back to what I just told you about my own personal experience in that teaching I love. I've got such a huge passion for teaching. I mean, I love teaching. My students love me as a lecturer. Um, I'm always getting commendations and stuff. But it's not to say I'm a bad researcher. When it comes to academics, I mean, I've produced, whether it's conference proceedings, journals, book chapters, even a book. Um, I'm there with the likes of other researchers and stuff. But I wouldn't say it's my strongest point, like you said. We always improving. It's always enhancing our skills as an academic. It's not only about having that PhD and becoming permanent or being a senior lecturer, moving up the academic ladder to a professor and so on. But we can learn, and I kept saying we're learning every day. It's much like Vignet 3 in that you humble yourself and we don't know. We must always tell ourselves that we don't know everything. Sometimes you can actually learn from your students. You learn a lot. I've learned a lot from my students, especially I think I used the example on Thursday, the student from tire manufacturing. Doing a master's qualification, I learned this from the student a lot about the manufacturing processes and stuff, and us incorporating or integrating from international standards, bringing it here into South Africa. And you learn because it's imparting knowledge. So it's not only I'm supervising the student and the student has to follow what I have to say, ABCD, but in turn you can also learn from the students. It's like I said, it's a huge experience, learning curve for everybody. Yeah, Tony, your hand is up.
I wonder, Prof, if this has to also do with what they call continuous professional development. That it's almost as if when you reach a stage of your professional career, a lot of people like hit a ceiling. And we are actually essentially always meant to keep up with the modern ways of doing our jobs. We need
Yes,
to know the most state of the arts methods and
yes.
literature and all of that. So it is a form of continuous professional development.
It is, most definitely. Because remember, now as we're going into this fourth industrial revolution, we have to keep up with the times. We have to keep up with not only research evolving, with your teaching and learning methods evolving, you also have to keep up with what industry is doing because you now need to incorporate that or integrate that into your curriculum because what we were teaching before kind of becomes obsolete in that you have to now put in the new technologies that industry is using, whether it's a manufacturing sector, service sector, private sector, public sector. You've got to start adapting all that into your teaching, into your research as well. We don't want to be giving the students outdated information, so it's continual learning for everyone. It doesn't stop. Like I said, just because you reached a certain level as a professor, does it mean that you know everything? No. For me personally, I feel we learn every day, and I'm always learning every day, and I learn a lot from students, especially coming from industry. If you don't have that industrial background, coming into academia, it makes it a lot difficult when you have to teach to your students because you yourself don't have that practical knowledge. All we're doing is teaching from theory, from textbooks. We haven't been on a production line. You haven't counted the number of defects. You haven't seen a process go out of control. So I, for one, I have an advantage in that I came from the printing and packaging industry. So I've had industrial background before I went into academia. So you need that practical knowledge and all because you're teaching your students, you need to know the background. All right. Anyone else wants to weigh in on Vignet 4 before we move on to 5? I'm not seeing any hands up. We good? Thumbs up, can we move on? So moving on, Vignet 5. In a chapter titled Academic Writing and Research at an Afropolitan University, Aditi Hanma from Mauritius and Emmanuel Sibomana from Rwanda. Remember, we read the Vignet 1. Question how the two South African universities in which they were doctoral students positioned themselves in relation to the political North and the political South, and what this means for both international and local students. Having agreed that in terms of academic writing, South African universities seem to hold diverse views as to what really constitutes as the traditions of the center. They have chatted online. Here is a conversation that they had, Emmanuel. So do you think we're studying at the center or on the periphery? So Aditi's response, as Afropolitan universities, UCT and WITS, aspire to being on a par with makers of global knowledge. They ought not to merely emulate other institutions, but to share their uniqueness with them. Your question about the center and the periphery is an intriguing one. It feels as though we study at the center of the peripheries, but at the periphery of the center. Emmanuel, I agree with you, but I think we are more central than peripheral. I think your description fits us, to which Aditi responds, which could also be a good thing. As long as we do not compromise our uniqueness by conforming blindly to the standards that are out there. Aditi, yes, such a hard balance to strike. We need to move with the world and can't be left behind, yet stick to our own traditions and principles. Emmanuel then responds, true, we do not live in isolation, and with globalization, we also need to be part of the bigger academic world. Aditi, and in the end, who judges us? Can we be in equal partnership with other global players? To which Emmanuel responds, I don't think so. Anyone wants to comment on that? Firstly, what is the Afropolitan universities that we are talking about? Anyone come across this before? And we're saying that WITS and UCT are Afropolitan.
Prof, I'm not too sure I understand what makes a university Afropolitan. I'm not too sure if I can.
Okay, so basically, from my understanding of what an Afropolitan university is, it's more of the diversity and cultures that you have, right? So I don't only think that WITS and UCT have the Afropolitan. I think UJ, DUT, Nelson Mandela, all of them also. It's just that we have more diversity. I think after the democracy from 1994, it's just incorporating much more of the diversity into your universities. The only difference is that how much of it have we incorporated? So it's establishing that university as an African university in terms of diversity, our reputation in terms of diversity and culture. Are we bringing African aspects? So this is where the globalization and decolonization comes in, as even in the syllabus, because we were even told as UJ, other universities as well, to bring in African perspectives, because we were using books, textbooks, and so on, and notes that were westernized, colonized.
So,
Did we
Prof,
actually now start integrating that? So the Afropolitan basically was bringing in the African and perspective and diversity of our different cultures. Yes, Tony?
okay, so it has to do with discourses rather than issues of access, perhaps, because I imagine UNISA being very open in terms of access, and a lot more African students actually have more access to something like UNISA. But I don't think the discourse speaks like an African kind of discourse. And UJ, I think, would be much more closer to that.
Yeah.
In our approach to decolonization, I think we were much more robust and much more stern, and we have still kind of kept the project going, even though we've taken on new themes and new topics. So UJ, I think definitely Afropolitan.
No, UJ does. So they use UCT and WITS as an example because yes, they have done that. UJ is also on the forefront of that Afropolitan in that, aside from UNISA having open access or being more accessible, UJ has also been more accessible in terms of the diversity of students that we have as well as our staff. You have a huge culture of Africanization, if I may say, of the staff as well. We heavily decolonized in that we're not only South African based, we are African based in that our staff and our students come from all over Africa. And you're learning diversity and inclusion. We learn about inclusion and you're learning about everywhere, different cultures. The only thing I think where a lot of the universities fall behind is what we spoke about in the last two previous lectures is about the language being multilinguistic, you know, adapting to the African perspective, the African culture, and people not having English as a first language. This is where I think we were for lacking. But in terms of accessibility, we're highly accessible on a global scale. So we have international students, we have African students, we have local students. Yeah, and we have incorporated African perspective. We've decolonized our syllabus quite significantly as UJ. Yeah, anyone else? So I think that's basically where we are looking at. Are we in the center of this Africanization or are we sitting on the peripheral borders? You know, and what can be done now? Because I think we're progressing every day. It's not something that's going to just happen overnight and we say, okay, fine, you know, we're there. We decolonize. No, it's improving. It's continual improvement. Anyone else has any other views on Vignet 5?
Yeah, I've been keeping a bit quiet there because my university is rather new,
Okay.
but we regard ourselves as an African university. And from, of course, we started under UJ, the education faculty. The first 4 years we worked under UJ. So we
Yeah.
have a similar thing, but we have really gone to a lot of trouble to Africanize, as you say, but in a very positive way. We start off from the African perspective, but we make sure that we keep in touch with the global situation. Because, I mean, there is knowledge is just shared everywhere. And I really think, yeah, we've gone quite a far way with that. And I think we sometimes think because it's African, it is not of a good standard. And that is really absolutely untrue because we must start regarding our own knowledges as really worthwhile. It's only other people are not going to decide for us to have a good knowledge. But we have a good knowledge. We have to make sure that sorry, I've got a, we'll have to make sure that sorry, I'm going to close.
Yurika, we lost you.
Sorry, my dogs decided they want to eat one another. Now, what I'm trying to say is that we have really made sure that our African heritage, African indigenous knowledges are on the forefront.
And I think that is what is important in that in order to be Afropolitan, we have to bring in the African perspective. We have to bring in our diversity, be more inclusive of everyone's culture or everyone's background. And this is where we speak about your identity because sometimes when we are writing in research, and this is about academic literacy, we want to bring in our own identity, our own voice, our own thoughts into it, you know? And as we mentioned, you always have to support it, but it's my thoughts and it's my beliefs and it's, you know, it's my voice that's going into this research. So don't lose that essence for academic writing where um, maybe the university has a certain standard or template you have to follow, but no, we're moving away from that where we can now start changing the dynamics ourselves. It can start with us. We don't have to wait for someone else to make an impact. We start doing it ourselves. Okay, moving on. You then move on to activity 2. Are we on activity 2.4? After reading the Vignets 3 to 5, write a paragraph about what you might enjoy and what you might find challenging about supervising any one of your students described in these Vignets. So I think we've unpacked it quite a bit. You can unpack it more. You all can form your own groups We did this last semester where we said, work with each other when you're doing these activities, have discussion groups outside of this class. And it doesn't, like I said, have to stop here. You can set up another teams where you can all work together today, or you can continue on the same teams. We'll just extend the time, but I think it's set for 11. But yeah, so work in your groups, discuss your views and your points on those Vignettes 3 to 5, but we've unpacked it in class. And just give, what do you enjoy about supervising your students? Pick one student, your experiences. What challenges did you get? And can you relate to those challenges and opportunities as it was mentioned in Vignette 3 to 5? Okay, think you can manage that?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. All right. I want to finish the remainder of 2.4 and then we can have a small break and then come back. So continuing with 2.4, becoming this knowledge producer at a doctoral level. We are now on page 31. So I'm not sure why it's showing. I think it's a typo. I think it's not activity. It's actually activity 2.3. It's not 2.7. It's the one that we had from Vignet 1, 2, 3, 4, the one previously. So this will come out. So making an original contribution to knowledge is usually a requirement of doctoral research, arguably requiring a level of confidence in one's own ability to make such a contribution and to write convincingly about your research. So as we mentioned, at a doctoral level, you're bringing about new knowledge, right? Original contribution. So, and it's adding to the body of knowledge that already exists. Whereas at a master's level, we're just adding on to that knowledge where we build on certain concepts and frameworks and so on, right? Here you are bringing something new where you create your own or develop your own research framework, bringing in something new. Your response to the questions posed in Vignet 3, 4, and 5 is based on very limited information, but even so, perhaps your responses would vary according to whether or not you think you would enjoy the process of building the confidence of teachers as knowledge producers, whether or not you think you would enjoy working with a seemingly confident academic whose PhD evolves slowly alongside teaching, supervising, honors, and master's students and publishing, whether or not you are interested in exploring the international students' concerns about their own academic identity and the identity of universities in South Africa. So, in those three Vignets that we looked at, 3, 4, and 5, all the doctoral students were registered for a traditional PhD. Philpott investigated whether the needs of students registered for the professional doctorates were similar to or different from those of traditional PhD students, and thus whether the implications of the doctoral supervision were similar or different. Her main finding was that in practice, it makes more sense to make an ideographic approach and to recognize a particular constellation of needs that individual students have, irrespective of the route that they are taking, while having a particular sensitivity to those that may be more commonly occurring for students on professional doctoral programs when supervising these students. The two commonly occurring differences that Philpott did identify was in respect to self-image or identity and of motivation for registering for the degree. She notes that the number of studies of professional doctoral students produced the same findings that students generally believed were capable of or were not the kind of people to undertake a PhD, despite there being no discernible difference between the quality of their work and that of the PhD candidates. With reference to motivation, Philpott suggests that many PhD students regarded their doctorate as perhaps mandatory route into their chosen profession of working in higher education, while students undertaking the professional doctorate have a range of motivations which may include professional renewal, personal satisfaction, the quest for knowledge, and intellectual challenges, but which may not be directly linked to professional advancement. So what basically happens here is you have a traditional way of writing your PhD, which is your thesis-based, research-based thesis at a PhD level. And then you have a professional level, which is a professional degree. And this is what determines your niche area, right? Now, international students coming into the system, right? So when we say a traditional PhD, for example, which was your DBAs, Doctor of Business Administration, you had your Doctor of Philosophy in Commerce and so on, right? So difference between that is your approach. One would include a more practical approach, and others would include more research-based, where you have evaluation of theories and theoretical models, and professional degrees, you're actually dissecting and conducting the study, right? How much of that is incorporated and assisting international students coming into the system? Here is where we say, you will notice that most South African universities have a specific standard structure or template that they follow, format that they have, right? And we don't divert much from that standardization of writing a thesis and so on. But remember, students, international students coming into the South African universities are coming with a different background, different knowledge of how research is done overseas, internationally, at international universities, as opposed to what is being learned here. And then obviously put in the diversity and the cultural change and the African aspects, and then it blows their mind completely, right? Unless they're coming from those African backgrounds, traditional backgrounds. So this is what we're looking at, is in incorporating and integrating everything that is learned, generating your identity into your work, whether you are doing a professional degree or whether it's a traditional PhD, writing a thesis, formulating a theoretical framework, and so on, right? And we can unpack that as to, let's look at these 3 questions or responses that we had. Whether or not you think you would enjoy the process of building the confidence of teachers as knowledge producers, because as academics, as teachers, right, and supervising students, you're imparting your knowledge onto them, but you also have a process of building one's own confidence, own abilities, because like I said, when we went into that assessor and moderator training, we were so confident that we knew what we were doing, but we came out of that training humbled in that you don't know everything, and we obviously have to learn in order to fill those gaps, build our own confidence in order to impart that knowledge onto our students. Whether or not you think you would enjoy working with seemingly confident academics whose PhD involves slowly alongside teaching and supervising honors and master's students. Would you enjoy working with other academics? Possibly, because I think you learn more when it's hands-on. So as an academic, you progress from a master's to a PhD while you were still teaching, while you were still supervising. Because when I was doing my PhD, we needed to co-supervise master's students as part of the PhD journey. Because as you are learning and doing research, you're also sharing of that knowledge and research with the student that you are co-supervising or supervising at that point. So it's always a learning experience, because that's how I was taught, that you co-supervise as you are studying. So you're learning from each other. And then we already unpacked the one about international students and their concerns of their own academic identity coming into South African universities. All right. Any questions, any comments? We can take a 10-minute break, come back at 9:30 and continue with 2.5 and 2.6 and hopefully a bit of Unit 3. Anyone? Questions, comments? All good? All right, 10-minute break. I'm stopping the recording and then we'll be back at 9:30. Thanks, guys. See you soon.